The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation building series, The Law and You. This is program number 924, coming to you on Monday the 21st of January 2018. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic Elements of the Law of Landlord and Tenant. But before getting into the topic, just a few short preliminaries. As usual, my deepest condolences go out to families which have suffered recent bereavements, and in that connection, the family of the late sister Doris Jack, who lived at Riley but attended our church, St. Elizabeth at Belmont. She passed away a few days ago and will be laid to rest on the second Sunday in February. They have to wait the arrival of relatives from abroad, so the 10th of February would be her funeral at St. Elizabeth Cathedral, but she would be buried at the Riley Cemetery. My condolences to all the brothers and sisters who attend our church. And Saturday night there was the 49th service for the late Archdeacon James Harry, which unfortunately I could not attend. And Saturday afternoon, a memorial service for the late Brother Sims Martin. Also, I was unable to attend, but my deepest condolences to all the respective families. Excuse me. One of my cousins died and will be laid to rest in a few days' time. Anton John, well, we knew him as Anton Cunningham because he was the son of my uncle Malcolm Cunningham, but being born out of wedlock, he carried his mother's surname, John. Anton lived primarily in Barley, but for the last few years he has been staying with my aunt, Tanti Emily, in Leo. So to Tanti Emily and Sandra, my special condolences on the loss of Anton. That will be all for preliminaries. You would be relieved to hear. Landlord and tenant. Well, this program is primarily for the poor because the well-off enter into proper legal tenancy agreements when they have to do business of renting. So the well-off will normally go to lawyers and have the lawyer fix up a tenancy agreement or a lease, but the poor do not always find it convenient to go to lawyers for things like this. But I will give you a few hints as to what you can do to help yourself even if you are very poor. So that the topic would be concerned with the rental of small dwelling places and perhaps the rental of a spot of land. The arrangements for renting are sometimes quite informal. Person wants a place, hears of a place, goes and speaks to the owner, and by word of mouth, an arrangement is made where the owner says, look, this place is going to cost you $200 a month. The person says, okay, and that's it. Nothing is put in writing. Nothing is signed up. Nothing is said about the various obligations. But I want to let you know that the first obligation that a tenant undertakes when he or she rents a place is the obligation to pay the agreed rent at the agreed time. And that is fundamental to the whole law of landlord and tenant, the payment of rent on time. For that purpose, the person who owns the dwelling, which is to be rented, would normally have a receipt book. And I checked today, you can get a proper receipt book to purchase in Kingston at any stationery shop for between $6 and $8. So don't tell me you can't afford a receipt book. Because the important information which is written in the receipt book is the date, the name of the person who is paying the rent, the amount of the rent, and the signature of the person who is collecting the rent. And when you go to pay a rent, you should make sure you get a receipt. Now, you don't really have to have a lawyer for that. In fact, this is what you really should do. If you can't afford to go to a lawyer to sign up a document to arrange for the renting of a place, you get one sheet of copybook paper. That's all you need. And you write it in the form of a letter, as if you're writing a letter to somebody overseas. Let us say you're going to rent a room or a small house from Mr. Jones. All you need is one sheet of paper. Dear Mr. Jones, I would like to rent your house from you. Full stop. We have agreed that the rent will be X number of dollars per month, which is payable on the last day of every month. Yours truly, and you sign that. And you can also get somebody to witness it for you. That is all you need. And Mr. Jones, in turn, should then write you back an answer. Dear Mr. Williams, I agree to rent you my place for X amount of money per month, payable on the last day of each month. Signed, Tom Jones. That is all. The law doesn't really require any legal formality. There is no document you have to take to the courthouse to register if you are renting into a simple rental. If it is a lease of a substantial property, or a lease of substantial chunks of land, all right, but to rent a place, that's all you need, an exchange of letters between landlord and tenant containing the amount of the rent and when the rent is payable. Now, somebody may rent the place from me and say, look, I'm renting you this for $150 a month for the rest of this year. But from next year, January, I'm carrying it up to $200 a month. If the tenant agrees to that, all you need is a letter from the landlord saying that the rent is now so much and so much, but the rent will be increased at the end of the year or the beginning of next year, and an answer from the tenant saying, I agree to pay so much and so much now, and as from January 2020, I will pay you X amount, and you exchange the letters. As I said, you can have the letters witnessed. That is all. But in the absence of anything in writing, you can make an agreement in the presence of one or two witnesses. You take an uncle with you to go down by Mr. Jones when you're going to make the rent agreement, and the uncle is there when it is agreed between you and Mr. Jones how much you'll pay for his place every month. Or you can, if it's inconvenient to take a family, you could take a friend. So that at least there is one witness who can say, yes, this is what these persons agreed. Now, one of the important considerations in renting is to know exactly what is it you are renting. Where there is a house on a clearly defined lot of land, there's usually no problem. But a person may have a dwelling house subdivided into different so-called apartments. So you are only renting an apartment. An apartment could be 1 room, 2 rooms. You are renting an apartment in a house consisting of several other apartments. Sometimes you call them tenement buildings. Where that occurs, you have a potential problem in that because it is an apartment building, there would be areas in the building where the different tenants have to use either as an entrance, exit, or common areas. You may want to rent a place and the person says, well, you would know from knowing how the other tenants are dwelling. You may have to share toilet facilities. You may even have to share kitchen facilities. Now, those things could become a bit complicated. And if you don't get along with the other tenants, there's a possibility of botheration. So I'm speaking to the point of knowing exactly what it is you are renting. If you are renting a house on a piece of land, so you're renting a house and land, the land may have fruit trees which are bearing. And the owner of the land who is renting you that place may say, look, I reserve the right to come and pick my fruits whenever they are bearing. The owner may say, you are allowed to pick a few fruits for the consumption of yourself and your family, but you're not picking my fruits to sell, you know. And you say, okay. That should be put in a letter. that you are renting a parcel of land with a dwelling house on it, fruit trees, but that you only have the right to pick fruits for your consumption and the consumption of your family, but you don't have the right to pick off all the person's fruits to sell. For example, a person might have a house and two really lovely zabuka trees in the yard, or soursop tree and a zabuka tree, or a guava tree or whatever, which the person may be depending on to sell to help to supplement their income. So if you're renting the place and you know full well the landlord is depending on reaping those fruits, you have to use your conscience. And the landlord, if you are not keeping your part of the bargain, suppose you continue, you want to pick off the fruits and sell the man's fruits. The landlord has a right to give you notice and say, please, I want my fruits to use. So if you are renting a place and it has fruit trees, make sure you discuss with the landlord what right you have to reap his fruits. And under no circumstances can you cut down a fruit tree on premises which you are renting. No way. If any fruit tree is to be cut down, let the landlord come and cut it down. You can't go and say, well, the place is too bushy, or you want to view it, this is blocking your view, and therefore you cutting down piece of that mango tree. You want to get into trouble, leave the man's mango tree. If there's a problem, discuss it with him. Say, look, I want this tree limb, take off a few limbs so that it would make it less crowded. It's creating a problem of damp and so on and so on. But if you are renting premises which consist of a parcel of land and house, you can go cutting down trees, particularly bearing fruit trees. Now, immediately you will see that the question as to what you can do and what you cannot do as a tenant should be things that you and the landlord put in writing. And you don't need a lawyer for that. You just have to agree, and one page in a copybook. Well, to be safe, you could make 2 pages so that you have the letter in duplicate. You could write it over, sign it, and one of you keeps a copy, the other one keeps a copy, and so on. But a lot of misunderstanding can be avoided if persons at the beginning of a tenancy come to an agreement as to who should have what rights. No, excuse me. Now, it is usual for utility bills to be paid by a tenant. So, if the place has electricity, has a light meter, has water, has a water meter, you, the tenant, would normally be expected to pay those bills. But if you are renting an apartment in a house that has more than one apartment, there may just be one water meter for the whole dwelling house. or one electricity meter, and the landlord may decide, look, the meter is going to be in his name, and each tenant makes a certain contribution towards payment of the bill. Nothing is wrong with that. That is quite usual. People are normally hesitant when they rent out a place with the tenant having to pay utility bills, because sometimes the tenant gives up the place, leaves with unpaid utility bills. And this is what happens. You have a house, you rent it out to somebody. They're supposed to pay the light meter, the water meter. They don't pay those bills when they come, and they leave. And next thing you know, you're getting a bill from Vinlec for hundreds of dollars, or from CWSA for hundreds of dollars for light consumption and water consumption. Where the meter is in the name of the owner, which is usually the case, because if somebody is coming to rent your place, you don't go and change over your meter to their name. You keep your meter in your name. Where the meter is in your name, and any tenant runs up unpaid bills and leaves, the utility company is looking to you, the owner, for payment of those unpaid bills. And they usually will cut off the service, cut off the light, cut off the water, until you pay the arrears. And so has left your place. Sometimes you can't find them. Unpaid bills behind, and you now have to pay those unpaid bills to get a reconnection so that you could bring in another tenant. And what most people do, they say, look, if they're going to rent the place to somebody, they want a security deposit. They'll say, look, you pay me $150 at the beginning of the tenancy. That is in case when you leave unpaid bills behind, I will pay them out of the $150. I'm just using a figure. Therefore, it is important that there be a clear understanding between landlord and the tenant as to who pays what. Of course, if a tenant wants to leave, then the law says the tenant should give notice of his or her intention to leave. Usually, the period of notice is the same as the period over which rent is paid. So if you pay rent by the month, you are normally expected to give a month notice. Similarly, if the landlord wants to bring the tenancy to an end, wants to put you out, the landlord gives you a month notice. And at the end of that month, he has the right to go to court and get you out. Or if you plan to leave, you give 1 month's notice. When you carry your rent, you say, look, that is it, I want to leave at the end of this month. And when the time comes, you leave. And then, of course, when you leave, the landlord has to check the place to find out if you have caused any damage to the home, particularly if you have had young children who are out of control. All these things can create problems, but most of the problems associated with small tenancies can be handled if people learn to communicate and if people are more honest one with the other. In St. Vincent and Grenadines, because of the housing situation, there are people who, especially when they're just starting off with their careers, need to rent. And there will be people who have places to be rented out to others. It's give and take. Finally, I've had to answer this question many times. Mr. Campbell, you think it's fair that my landlord should just increase the rent like that? Well, unfortunately, the laws we have on the books which govern, which regulate tenancies have not been working for decades. So to all intents and purposes, the amount a person charges to rent a place to you is dependent on their idea as to what they think they can get. There's no point going to court and say, well, I should only pay reasonable rent. Yes, but there's no legislation in force, at least no legislation that is active, which would help you out. And therefore, landlords tend to charge as much as they possibly can get away with. And if a landlord tells you that, look, from next month, this $300 place is going to, I want $400 or more, the only choice you have is to either pay the extra rent or leave at the end of the month. So unfortunately, there is not a lot of protection in the laws of St. Vincent and Grenadines for persons who are exploited by unscrupulous landlords. Increase the rent and they haven't spent any money to increase the value of the amenities. I mean, if a landlord rebuilds a place and refurbishes, you can't expect to be paying the same low rent for one kind of house, and the person spends money to fix it up nice and so on. You can't expect to be paying the same rent. You must expect you'll be asked to pay a little more. But how much more? It's a question of the circumstances. All right, so I hope I have been a little helpful to some of you who have landlord and tenants problems, but nothing beats discussing the matter when you have a problem. All right? Okay, so that is all from tonight's program of The Law and You. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday Night DV, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.